There's a lot of evidence that does suggest that women's featherweight is going to be a division no longer now that Amanda Nunes has retired. So that does open up the opportunity for the UFC to potentially open up a women's atomweight division. Now, this is going to be a division lower than women's strawweight at 105 pounds, and I think it probably could benefit the UFC in a multitude of ways. And in this video, I'm going to be going over 20 fighters that the UFC could sign right now to form their women's atomweight division. Now, it doesn't look so good right now, but with time and with development, I do believe that it could be a much bigger and better division than women's featherweight was, because at the end of the day, it really was just a division that Amanda Nunes ruled over, and there wasn't any title changes. There was no one that could ever compete with Nunes at 145. Now, after Chris Cyborg left as well, of course. So, I think women's atomweight definitely could have a future. Right now, if you do look at all of the people that I have lined up, there's nobody signed to one championship, for example. There's no one that I know of that's on an exclusive contract. So, there's definitely a lot of fighters that, you know, maybe could be added if the UFC was to try and purge from one championship, but for now it's just all free agents that have got that realistically the UFC could throw money at and say, hey, we want to make a UFC women's atomweight division and we want to sign you. Now, women's atomweight, it sounds like an odd division, you know, obviously the girls are a lot smaller, there generally is a lot less finishes at women's atomweight than other women's divisions, but it is pretty still a very fun division. I have seen a few women's atomweight fights when I was watching Invicta FC every now and then, and also even then on top of that, women's strawweight, by a lot of people's opinions, is the best women's division to watch because it's a lot more technical than women's bantamweight, for example. And speaking of women's bantamweight at the time of the list being made, it is a little bit outdated. There was only 20 fighters in the women's bantamweight division. I understand they recently signed heaps, so there's probably closer to 30, but 20 fighters probably would be enough to really get the division started. And that's kind of what I'm going to talk about today, getting the division started. I think if you introduced a women's atomweight division, it would take a long time before like a pay-per-view star come out of the division. It would take quite a long time before you had like a dominant champion. It would take a long time as well before the regional scene for women's atomweight really developed, because I feel like a lot of women don't fight at women's atomweight when they could make that weight class because they have to fight at women's strawweight to be in the UFC. So I think with a lot of time, it would take quite a while to develop. But I do think a women's atomweight weight class potentially could be a realistic thing in the future, especially if women's featherweight does disappear. And speaking of, I think Secreta Azawa would be like the #1 signing that the UFC could make. I did say fighters that were free agents, I guess you could say. I don't know if Secreta Azawa is. I think she's signed to Ryzen, but I'm pretty sure she would be a fantastic signing for the UFC. She is undefeated. She's probably going to beat this girl called Claire Lopez, who could be and should be on this list if she's not. And she would be undefeated. She's 25 years old. Definitely a girl that you could probably build a division around. She's 10-0. Pretty marketable as well. She's from Japan. She could be like the face of Japanese MMA. Obviously, there's a lot of other fighters coming up, but maybe she could be like the face of women's MMA in Japan. Secreta Azawa would be a good sign-in. And there's a lot of Japanese fighters on this list. Another one is Jiharu Sawada. She's 25 years old. I don't know too much about her wrestling background, but I did Google her, and I do know that she at least competed in World Wrestling Championships recently. So, you know, she's got a good wrestling base. She's 5-0. She's actually fought some good competition as well. She recently beat a girl that was 7-1, and she is 5-0. She's beaten a girl that was much more experienced than her, 21-6 as well, very recently. The next fighter is Sayori Oshima. She is 12-3. She's also from Japan. There are fighters not from Japan on this list, but it does just happen that Japan does have some of the best women's atomweight fighters, which would be a good thing as well, because UFC is obviously trying to build in Asia. So Sayori Oshima would be a good signing. She is 12-3. She has fought for Ryzen in the past. She is on a Ryzen contract, so maybe there's a little bit of problems there, but she could be a good sign-in for the UFC to start off this atomweight division. Next fighter that the UFC could sign to kick off a women's atomweight division is Anastasia Nikolakos, and she is from Canada, and she would be a pretty good sign-in. And the reason why she would be a good sign-in is because the UFC doesn't have too many Canadian fighters, and they recently did the event UFC 289 in Canada, and Jasmine Divisius seemed to have made a pretty big name for herself with that win. So maybe Anastasia could also be another face of women's MMA from Canada. Maybe she could put on a couple of good performances and be a good representative for them. Rayani De Santos is another fighter. She's been fighting at women's atomweight after she lost on Dana White's Contender Series to Denise Gomes, and she recently actually beat Jillian DeCorsi for the bout at women's atomweight at Invicta FC. She is the Invicta FC atomweight champion, And she probably will be in the UFC soon, potentially at 115 pounds. But at 105 pounds, she went out there, did her thing, and won the title for Invicta FC. The next fighter is Jessica Dalboni. She's also a very good fighter at women's atomweight that has done a lot of fights for Invicta FC. 13-4, she lost to Jillian DeCorsi when she was the champion, who then lost to Rayani De Santos. And she recently did beat Danielle Taylor, and Danielle Taylor has had like a crazy career fighting a lot of different people. So she's coming off a pretty good win. At women's atomweight, she is very small. Like, she would be very small for 115 pounds, so that could make sense. Viviane Pereira has recently been fighting at women's atomweight after getting cut from the UFC after having a pretty bad run. She lost 3 in a row. She fought Alicia Zapatella. I believe that fight was at 105 pounds, but the point is she could also be someone that you could sign. She hasn't fought for 3 or 4 years, but she's on the list anyway. Another fight is Nicole Giraldo, and she would be a very smart signing for a lot of reasons. To start with, she's 24 years old. She's from Mexico, and she's very marketable. I mean, she's very marketable. She's quite good looking, is what I'm trying to say. She would probably be a very good promotional sort of person for women's atomweight. You know, she's from Mexico to start with. UFC's trying to build into Mexico. Nicole Giraldo would be a good representative of women's atomweight in Mexico. And she's 24 years old, 5-1. She's a good prospect. She has recently lost to a girl called Monique Adrian, who is on this list, but a little bit later on. And she's now Monique Adrian is 32 years old, so she's a bit older. But she is 6-2. She recently did beat Nicole Giraldo. She's fought for Invicta a bunch of times. So she's from Brazil. There's a lot of good fighters from Brazil. Monique Adrian could be another one to enter the UFC. Siwoo Park is a South Korean fighter, 9-5, 32 years old, and atomweight as well, obviously. She could be another good smart signing. She recently actually had a very close fight against Secreta Azawa, who was the undefeated fighter I was talking about to start with. You know, the UFC doesn't have that many fighters from South Korea, and having a fighter from South Korea in women's atomweight could be quite good to maybe build up the talent in South Korea. Maybe more females would look to see Siwoo Park and take up MMA, potentially get themselves into the UFC themselves. The next fighter is Kenneth Sakura. Very, very experienced fighter. She's 20-7, but she's only 25 years old. She has fought a lot for Rizin. She's fought once for Bellator, but I think she could be a smart signing. I don't know. She might actually be on an exclusive contract because she's been fighting for Rizin, but she would be a smart signing just because you would add a lot of experience to that women's atomweight division. A lot of the girls that have been going through recently have had like less than 8 pro fights. You've got someone with 27 pro fights that would kind of like help legitimize the division. It would kind of make it look like the division isn't just brand new and all of the fighters are new to MMA. It would just, you know what I mean. It would add a veteran to the division and a young veteran as well. Alessandra Ferreira is 6-2. She is 25 years old. She's also from Brazil. She's also fought for Invicta a lot. Invicta was a pretty good source for me to find a lot of fighters. And even then, these girls that she recently beat probably have good records still themselves because they are recent. You could sign them as well. Ayaka Murakami is 6-1. She's from Japan. She's 31 years old. She did recently fight for Deep, so she won't be on an exclusive contract to my knowledge. She's fought good girls and she's beaten good opponents as well. I think she could be a pretty smart signing. And I've got Ayaka Hamasaki. Now, this is an interesting one because she's 41 years old, so maybe you don't want to sign a 41-year-old, but she's 24-6. She's got a lot of experience. She would add a lot of experience to the UFC's atomweight division. Once again, signed to Rizin, so maybe on an exclusive contract, but maybe that could be an option. Miki Matsuno is 8-3. She's 29 years old. She actually lost to Secreta Azawa, who's the undefeated girl I was talking about earlier, twice. She's lost to Casey O'Neill. She's only ever lost to really, really good fighters. And she's beaten a couple of good fighters recently, 2-0, 4-4, and 7-3. She could be a good signing from Japan. They've got Alessandra Ferreira, who I just talked about. She's on the list twice. So maybe there's only 19 fighters on the list. I'm sorry, I think I might have lied. Anna Palacios is 7-2. She's 25 years old. She would also be a pretty good representative for women's atomweight in Mexico. The girl that she beat is Jiharu Sawada, who I talked about before and is really good. Florin is another women's Mexican atomweight that would also make sense for the UFC to sign because obviously they're trying to build into Mexico. Adding a women's atomweight division and signing a woman from Mexico will just be a great start. And then there's just a lot of kind of options there. She lost to Alessandra Ferreira, who I was talking about earlier. Jung Park is 9-7. She's from South Korea. Not a very good record, to be fair, but she's only ever lost by decision. She's only ever really lost to good fighters in the past. Recently, she did lose to a 5-3 and a 2-3 girl, which is a pretty bad look, but she has been on a good run. She's 6-1 in her last 7 fights. So maybe she could go into the UFC's Atomweight division, also represent South Korea. There's not many South Korean fighters in the UFC, let alone female South Korean fighters. I don't think there's any. So I think, once again, you could add a South Korean female atomweight fighter, and that would help inspire more female fighters from South Korea to fight at atomweight in the UFC. And then the last person on the list is the former Invicta champion, Jillian DeCorsi. She is 38 years old, but she has actually been very vocal about trying to get a women's atomweight division herself. But unfortunately for Jillian DeCorsi, I don't know if she will be like fighting to see it, because she's 38 years old. I mean, she's taken up MMA recently, so I don't know how long she's going to keep going for, but she really has been trying to fight for a women's atomweight division for a while, so maybe she could also be a good signing. And I think the way that you'll probably have to do it to start, you'll probably have to do like a 16-girl tournament, and they'll just fight each other, like the number 16 seed fights the number 1 seed, all this, and they end up with the 2 fighters at the end, and they would kind of like Road to UFC. But I think with the Road to UFC, what you would do is, instead of doing it on separate events like Road to UFC does, which I think is a little bit silly, but it does make sense, have it on the prelims of fight cards, you know? So obviously at the start of the tournament, maybe you can put them on Apex cards, and then kind of as you get towards the end of the tournament, you get the final fight of the tournament for the women's atomweight title to really get some steam for these girls, because obviously you want to have a pay-per-view star. Would you have a pay-per-view star to start with? No, not at all, in my opinion. But I think what you could do is you could have the finals on like the featured prelim of a pay-per-view, or even on the main card of a pay-per-view as like a bonus fight. So you have 6 fights on that pay-per-view, and one of them is for the atomweight title belt to kind of get a little bit of hype going. And then like the semi-finals can be on like the prelims of a pay-per-view, or the early prelims of a pay-per-view. And then the fights before that can be on the prelims of a fight night in front of a crowd. So you actually get people knowing that there's a women's atomweight division, like that it exists, right? Because you don't want to just create the women's atomweight division, have the 2 fighters that you think are the best fight each other. And also, even then in that tournament, you could say, hey, Tisha Torres, we're doing a women's atomweight tournament. Hey, Michelle Watterson, we're doing a women's atomweight tournament. Maybe that would be key. Maybe there's other fighters that could go down and fight at 105 pounds. I don't really know, but let me know what you think in the comments. I think I had some good fighters. I think I had some good points towards the end of there, but let me know what you think in the comments below.